just because it's not apparent in the numbers or the data does not mean that explanation doesn't exist. For example, people who are analytics, there are a lot of people who are analytics leaning who say, oh, the clutch gene is not a thing. It doesn't exist. Clutch play is randomness, and you can't use player X averaged these numbers during clutch time as a way to project what his clutch time numbers would be moving forward. You figure over the larger sample size, whatever that player is in clutch time is going to probably be along the lines of what he is in non-clutch time. You're just going to kind of even out and be the player that you are.
I feel like you're quoting me, by the way, and I'm going to take offense to your rebuttal, by the way. Just kidding.
while I believe that to be true, and I don't analyze the clutch numbers and say this guy is clutch because of the clutch numbers, you also get to know people. You get to know players. And we know people who are like this in life, who when the pressure goes up, they just shrink. And we all have people in our lives who are like, well, yeah, of course he's a straight A student who did terribly on the SATs. That's the most anxious person I know. Like he probably freaked out during the SATs, even though he's so smart, knew all the material, he probably freaked out, couldn't pull it off. We all know people who are the opposite, who are the ultimate foxhole people, who like, maybe that person isn't the most street smart person, but it's like, that is the person I want in my foxhole, because if I need something done in a high pressure situation, this person's going to be totally unfazed and will get it done. Any random sample, I mean, look, NBA players are just basically they're essentially from a personality type, a random sampling of people, being really, 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 really good at basketball is not indicative of any kind of personality traits. Some of them are incredible leaders. Some of them are not incredible leaders. Some of them are unbelievably smart. Some of them are not unbelievably smart. Some of them are those ultimate foxhole people, and some of them are the people who shrink. And I don't believe you can like parse away from the numbers. And I don't know how you can prove definitively in a yes or no fashion who is clutch and who isn't clutch. But because we can't answer that in a sufficient fashion doesn't mean that the concept doesn't exist. You know what I mean? And so I think you kind of have to approach journalism in a way of like, all right, I can't answer this yet, but I'm still going to search. I'm going to search for as much as I possibly can, which is like, this playoff thing is a thing that I think about with Julius Randle all the time, where it's like people say Julius Randle is bad in the playoffs because he has been bad in the playoffs. I genuinely don't know if that means he will continue to be bad in the playoffs. He was so hurt during that Miami series last year and wouldn't tell anybody. And I just don't know if there's anything we can take away from that. And then the Hawks series was his first time being swarmed in a playoff series the way that he was, and the Knicks didn't have the roster to combat it. And maybe Randle is just a guy who won't be good in the playoffs. Maybe. There's some stuff where I'm like, I don't know, but I'm going to find out all the reasons behind it and why and what people are thinking and all of that. And to me, that's also just like, we don't need to find an answer for a story to be written. We could just be like, here's an interesting question. Nobody knows the answer, but here's all the information I can find out about it.
I just love this point so much, and I'm going to try not to just like harp on this because this is really piqued my interest. I totally agree as far as like, people who can potentially shrink in these clutch situations. I think that's definitely true. And I love your point about it being, the NBA players being just a random sampling of the population, the general population of the United States or, now internationally. So I totally agree with that. I think it's so interesting that as far as my belief about how players perform in the clutch, I do think there are people who are essentially like sensitive to, maybe scientifically the way I would explain is like they're sensitive to like their own adrenaline or cortisol system. So they might respond to, actually, here's a good way to explain it. People who have like disordered anxiety, it's not just that they are like, get more anxious than others. It's that they tend to be anxious of their own anxiety. So if you have like a heart palpitation or you have like a stomach issue as a result of being anxious in a situation, now that becomes disordered when you're also afraid of the heart palpitation, right? Like you're afraid of that symptom. So then it just creates a spiral. And you may have that sensitivity, and then we'll see those players actually struggle more in these situations where those adrenaline levels rise, right? So I totally buy that, as not just buy, I think that that's probably deductively true. It's just projecting which players that's true about, and then being able to say, oh, look, Julius had 2 rough playoff series. He's one of those guys. It's like, I don't think you can do that. Like, I don't think you can just point to he hasn't had success across, a 14 game sample and say, yeah, he's one of those guys. So that's where I feel like, the data, we need a larger sample to be able to say, yes, this is a trend that we know is true. And then we can retroactively be like, why is this happening? So that's how I view that.
Totally. And that's why it's important for my sake to be able to know people on a deeper level than just understanding their games. It's important for me to be able to look at Julius Randle and be like, Julius Randle's kind of an introverted guy. He cares a ton about the game. He cares a ton about being prepared, about playing every single night. I think if he could find one doctor that allowed him to play with a dislocated shoulder, I think he would do it. I think he's just a freaking maniac in that sense. And there's nothing that I see where I'm like, now it might be the case that he's not there, but there's nothing that I see where I could definitively be like, he will be good in the playoffs or he won't be good in the playoffs. There are some guys who I have covered where you can see it. I covered Andre Robertson when I was covering the Thunder. And I will never forget Andre, who was this really open guy, sweet guy, and could not hit free throws. And the Rockets were fouling him intentionally at the end of a playoff series. And he's just missing free throws like crazy. And they lost that game because of the hacking stuff. And after that game, he was distraught. I mean, he was like almost tearful and was so distraught. And from that moment on, he started to really just never want to go at the hoop because it was like he was having flashbacks to the line. Being around Andre, I could tell that was the case. You knew that was what he was thinking. And it was really unfortunate to see. And, that's a time where something gets, and obviously, look, he was an unbelievable defender. And what happened with his career is such a shame with the injuries ending his career. And that, this was not what ended his career. It was that he tore his patellar tendon and he never recovered properly. And he was an unbelievable defender. But that's a time where I'm like, okay, well, emotionally, this guy has got some stuff that he needs to work on. Not because he was, any kind of a mess of a human being or anything like that. I was so impressed by him as a person after that game, the way he still stayed and talked to us in what was such a difficult moment for him. Now he answered every question when he just looked. Nobody wanted to be there asking him those questions, and we all had to do our jobs. And in those moments, the reporters never want to be doing that crap. It's just like, this is a nice dude who just had a horrific day, and now we're asking him questions about it. Nobody wants to be there. And so, because we're impartial, but we're socially competent, like we understand when someone is there just having the worst day ever. Like it's not fun. It's not a fun activity.
You're just a human, like experiencing another human in that space. That's
totally
that's difficult,
especially when it's like, oh, this is just like a guy who's nice to everybody, like it's just, you feel even different. But like that's a situation where it's like, okay, you can see it. And then there are other guys where you're like, this guy's just totally uninhibited. There's some guys who I cover who are so oblivious. Like my theory on Mitchell Robinson being amazing in the Cavs theory is that like Mitch might not have even known it was the playoffs, Like,
Jesus.
you might have thought it was December.
I hope that's not like, I hope that's not close to true.
No, I hope it is, actually.
I'm just joking around. But Mitch,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
I mean, people know Mitch's personality. He lives in his own world, you know? And so, like, Mitch is never going to be psyched out by the playoffs. He's just so in Mitchell Robinson land all the time. Like, he's never going to let a big moment get to him like that, because that's just not, it's not how his brain works. And there's some people who I can say that about because I feel like I know them well enough to be able to break that down. And then there are, but whenever I have that opinion on a player or a thought on a player, analysis of a player, it's never really because, like, oh, he shot this percentage in the clutch and thus he's a clutch guy.
I love that. And I think I totally buy that level of like aloofness essentially insulates you to being impacted by pressure. And I actually hope, I mean, I think that if players could just have that, like, just, I don't even know what month it is. Like, if they could choose to have that mentality, they probably would want it, right? Like, you probably would just want your performance in the playoffs to just reflect who you are as a player rather than the way that you respond to pressure situations, right? Like that's probably what you would choose if you could. So I love that.